afternoon. I'm Coach Robinson, and this is the 8th grade mathematical curriculum course. Today's lesson will be solving multiplying equations. Before we jump into the lesson, I'm going to give you guys a refresher on integers, multiplying and dividing positive and negative integers, because in the lesson you will have to divide negative numbers by positive numbers, and if you don't know the rules, you may get the wrong answer. So let's start up here. If you positive number and times it by a negative number, the result is a negative answer. If you take a negative number and times it by another negative number, the result is a positive number. With division, if you divide a negative number by another negative number, it is a positive answer. If you divide a positive number by a negative number, the result is negative. And the same, if you take a negative number and divide it by a positive number, the result is negative. Last lesson, we did coefficients and variables, and we learned that a variable is a letter used in a mathematical problem, and the coefficient is the number that goes in front of the variable. And when you see a number and a variable together, this means to multiply, okay? So in order for us to complete this problem here, we have to solve for y, and they didn't provide us a value for y, so I'm going to show you how to solve for y if you don't have a value. So first and foremost, in order for you to solve for y, you have to isolate it. Since this means to multiply, we have to do the opposite mathematical operation, which means divide. So in order for me to isolate y, I have to divide y by 4, and whatever you do on one side of the equal sign, you have to do to the other side as well. So I'm going to divide this side by 4 and this side over here by 4. So we know 4 over 4 cancels out, so that leaves us y, and y equals negative 24 divided by 4, which is negative 6. Do a different problem. We have 2y equals negative 12. We know that 2y is a coefficient and a variable. This is a multiplication problem. And in order for us to solve for y, we have to isolate y. And how we isolate y is dividing y by 2. And whatever you do on this side of the equal sign, you have to do to the other side. So we have to divide negative 12 by 2 as well. Okay, same thing as last problem. These 2's will cancel out. Y equals negative 12 divided by 2, which is negative 6. Now let's do another example. This problem, we have negative 6r equals 36. We know that this is a multiplication problem. Essentially, this is a coefficient and a variable. So in order for me to isolate this variable, I have to divide by the coefficient. So that being negative 6. And whatever you do to one side of the equal sign, you have to do to the other side as well. So divide this side by negative 6. These two negative 6 will cancel out. So r equals 36 divided by negative 6, which is negative 6. A negative number times a negative number is a positive. 13b equaling negative 169. Don't confuse yourselves sometimes. You know, they'll write them backwards to throw you off. So the same methods and principles apply regardless of which side the negative or variable and coefficient is on, right? So we know that 13 is the coefficient and that the variable is b. This is a multiplication action. In order for us to isolate the variable, we have to do the opposite mathematical operation, which is to divide. So in order for me to isolate this variable, I have to divide it by 13. And whatever you do to one side of the equal sign, you have to do to the other side as well. So divide this side by 13 as well. These two 13's will cancel out, and b equals negative 13. Because negative 13 times a positive 13 is negative 169. Another example, negative 7b equals negative 77. We know this is a coefficient and a variable. In order for me to isolate this variable, I have to divide by the coefficient, right? So we're going to divide this by 7b, negative 7b. And whatever you divide on one side of the equal sign, you have to do to the other. So divide negative 77 by negative 7. So these two negative 7s cancel out. B will equal 11. Okay, another example. I have negative 250 equals 25J. In order for us to isolate this variable, we know we have to divide by the coefficient. So I'm going to divide this side by 25, and whatever you divide on one side of the equal sign, you have to do to the other side as well. Divide this by 25, all right? These two will cancel out. J will equal negative 250 divided by 25, which is negative 10. This last example, let's do negative 8R equals 72. Okay, we know this is a coefficient and a variable. In order for me to isolate the variable, I have to divide by the coefficient, which is negative 8. And whatever I divide on one side of the equal sign, you have to do to the other side as well. Negative 8 over here. So these two negative 8s will cancel. R equals 72 divided by negative 8, which is a negative 9. So this concludes the 8th grade mathematical curriculum course. The next lesson will be solving dividing equations. If you need a worksheet, any tutoring, I can be reached at unityservice216@gmail.com or Instagram at unitytutors216. Thank you. Y'all have a nice evening.